Following content is dedicated to my favorite DNC shilling, stolen valor committing, morbidly obese shit lib, Jessica Dollamore. So, chuds, we did it. The nightmare that was the Biden administration is over, and it is finally morning in America once again. No 3 a.m. ballot dumps, no endless litigations, no asinine conspiracy theories, just a clean, fair election that was called the night of. So let's look beyond the liberal waterworks and ask ourselves, how did this happen? Well, let's hear whose quote-unquote fault it really is that this empowered black queen of color was defeated by evil white Republican fascism, aka a free and fair democratic election from the husk of an alleged man who would twist himself into a meat pretzel just for his e-girl queen Kamala.
There's a certain flavor or iteration of privilege to be able to check out. A lot of people don't have that privilege. And I will remain, and look, I could take the criticism, you were wrong, you bloviated, and you had no real heart for this. I hear all of that. That is wrong. Those things are wrong. I'm here for the right reasons.
So to begin, Lardo over here feels the need to tell everyone that his heart is in the right place. It isn't, but the fact that he has to say this in the first place is quite frankly hilarious. Let's just keep listening to him.
I'm here because I know what can be accomplished by Trump and by Trumpism and by the right-wing authoritarians and the authoritarian-friendly media. I understand.
Okay, we could see Trump, the civil libertarian, is actually somehow a far-right authoritarian. Another absolute gem of commentary that we definitely have never seen before.
This win by Donald Trump and the MAGA movement has only instilled in me to double down on my aggression. Fuck them. Unbeeped, Chris. Unbeeped. Fuck them. I will not be intimidated. Threats of long-term prison sentences because I donated to Kamala Harris. Fuck you. Bring it. I live in Washington, D.C., where Trump soon will again live, where the MAGA faithful in the administration will permeate every border of this city. I'm not afraid.
Now, alright, is this a promise? Because I gotta say, you drive a mighty fine bargain, Chubby. I might have to exercise my Second Amendment right to preeminent self-defense, if you know what I'm saying. For legal reasons, that's a joke, by the way.
One of the things that has been all the hand-wringing excuses and trying to find a reason and the finger-pointing that's taken place after the election, after Kamala Harris's loss on Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. A lot of people are asking themselves and confused and perplexed about how white people ruined it for everybody. My shitty generation, Generation X, ruined it for everybody. But also, some blame does need to fall at the feet of the larger percentage of black males and the unwieldy percentage of Latino males who voted for Donald Trump, who are thinking, it's going to be somebody else who gets hurt.
And this is why the Democrats are going to become a permanent minority party. If they keep listening to the absolute worst among them, such as Big Jesse. Now, if I were in charge of Republican ads, I'd definitely compile all these angry videos of liberals screaming at Trump voters for not voting for Kamala and blast that shit nationwide. Because you see, believe it or not, I think that people like Dollamore, the Lincoln Project, Midas Touch, and all these other far-left grifters are actually beneficial for the long-term growth and sustainability of the right. These are some of the most irrational, unhinged, and downright disturbed individuals you could possibly meet, and they need to be made the face of the left. There's nothing that will cement in the minds of voters that a vote for Trump was the correct choice than to be shown angry clips blaming a fictitious upcoming apocalypse on them. I can think of no better way for the right to win the future than to have the left alienate the rest of the country on its own accord and permanently lock themselves out of political power. Now let's think with a growth mindset for a second and put ourselves inside the shoes of the Democratic Party. We've just experienced our biggest loss since 1988, with many states we used to be competitive in going to Trump, and many states we used to completely rely on shifting too far to the right for comfort. A sane party would take a look at itself before pointing fingers, but the Democratic Party is no sane party. What we can see with a lot of the biggest statewide and regional rightward shifts is a consistent trend among Generation X, Americans under the age of 30, non-college educated men, especially white and Latino men, and union voters, being some of the most favorable demographics for Donald Trump. This is, quite frankly, obvious. Trump was just the better candidate on the issues that matter. The Democrats chased the upper-class white Karen demographic, and that explains why culturally left-wing states like Colorado and Washington were some of the most left-trending states in the country, while New Jersey, a state filled with Latinos and white ethnics, became more competitive than Arizona. Meanwhile, the DNC's dreams were completely shattered in both Florida and Texas for the long term. So let's look at their biggest sources of electoral slippage and truly pick apart what it is that caused Donald Trump to absolutely, no pun intended, trump Kamala. According to the New York Times, the biggest shifts per cultural landmass would be Texas, Chicagoland, Appalachia, the Corn Belt, New York, Virginia, Boston, Arizona, the Bible Belt, and Florida. Now let's look at each of these places and try to pair up the local cultures and political views of their residents with various complaints leveled against the Kamala campaign to see if they could improve. Starting in alphabetical order, we have Appalachia. This region has probably shown us the single most dramatic decline in Democratic Party performance since the 1990s. The people of Appalachia tend to be socially conservative, but in favor of government intervention into the economy when it helps people. They're protectionists through and through, and they are also among the most patriotic groups of Americans to exist. As we can already see, the Harris campaign is fighting an uphill battle with these people. It's no coincidence that Appalachia is pretty well known as Trump country, and it isn't hard to see why. These people are anxious over the southern border, how migrants are poisoning our blood by bringing literal poison that we inject into our bloodstreams into this country. I think we can chalk this underperformance up to the following. Harris has weak left-wing stances on immigration. She's a free trader. She opposes the Second Amendment, and she has a strong insistence upon sending our money over to Ukraine. Her campaign also constantly demonized Donald Trump and his supporters, and as a result, she turned off a large amount of people here who I sincerely believe could have voted for her had she not run on such a poor platform. A lot of people in Appalachia still call themselves Democrats. They're members of unions, and they have strong roots that tie them to their towns. They have noble traditions, and they know that when the nearest police station is an hour away, they all need to take the law into their own hands should trouble arise. As a result of Kamala positioning herself in diametric opposition to the people of Appalachia, it isn't a surprise that they didn't turn out for her like they might have for Bill Clinton or Jimmy Carter back in the 90s or the year 1976. Up next, Southern Arizona. Personally, Arizona was one of my biggest misses in the 2024 election cycle. I thought the state would go down the wire because I believe that Arizona independents were just completely done with Trump and MAGA Republicans after our losses in 2022. So you can imagine my shock when Trump not only won the state on election night, but he did so by even more than he did in 2016. This is among the most difficult places to gauge, but it appears as though Arizona voted for Biden in 2020 because of a fluke, Mark Kelly won because he's a strong campaigner, and Lake lost because she's an awful candidate. This makes sense given that the state shifted quite sharply in Trump's favor. So now that we've explained the more recent history of Arizona, let's look at southern Arizona's biggest shifts. These can primarily be seen in Greenlee County and Santa Cruz County, two relatively sparsely populated counties that shifted quite substantially in favor of Trump. Adding on Trump's 6-point improvement in the infamously slow-counting Maricopa County, we can get a clearer picture that shows us that the people of Arizona simply rejected the Biden-Harris regime. The question here now is, if Harris had not been attached to the optical cancer that is Joe Biden, could she at least have been able to hold her own? My verdict is no. Arizona is a highly Latino state with a large population of Gen X voters, one of the biggest groups to swing in Trump's direction. Even if the Democrats ran a stronger candidate for the state of Arizona, I don't see them getting within 3 points of defeating Trump. The border is a massive issue in the Southwest, and Latino voters appear to be warming up to Trump at a rapid pace nationwide. While Arizona is certainly a lot more liberal than Kentucky, the issue that Kentuckians care about, such as immigration, are just as salient in Arizona. Given that Kamala Harris ceded the entire issue of immigration to Trump, it really comes as no surprise that the voters who broadly support Trump's agenda but don't like him personally have swung in his direction, as Biden outed himself as far left on the immigration issue, and especially so given that Arizona is a border state. Moving on, we have probably one of the most underreported shifts in Trump's favor, and that being the Bible Belt. In case you didn't know, the Bible Belt is known for its social conservatism, if the name didn't give it away. Now, given that quote-unquote Scranton Joe was no longer on the ticket, instead we had two unabashed far-left culture warriors running, it comes to no surprise that the part of the country that produced Mike Huckabee, Jeff Sessions, Tommy Tuberville, Pat Robinson, and Jesse Helms would not be particularly receptive to Brat Girl Summer or tampons in boys' bathrooms. What's interesting, however, is that the shifts to the right are actually notable even in the heavily black counties. In fact, some of the largest shifts to the right in the South came from places like Yazoo County, Mississippi, which shifted 11 points to the right, Hale County, Alabama, which shifted 12 points, McCormick and Marion counties in South Carolina shifted 12 and 11 respectively, and Webster County in Georgia shifted 11 to the right as well. Each of the counties listed have a majority black population and each also represented the single largest county-wide shift in favor of Trump out of their respective states. What this shows us is that despite Kamala being black, rural black voters were turned off by her, showing us that the racial gap in polling is finally starting to decline, possibly permanently if the Democrats don't get their act together. Besides the Black Belt, there's one place where Democrats are expected to overperform. It's big blue cities. And I can think of no city as big and blue as the great city of Boston. Ever since 1928, the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts has been a blue state owing to its large population of wealthy white liberals and Democratic-leaning Catholics. Now, with such a long streak of voting for Democrats, you might expect the state of Ted Kennedy and Elizabeth Warren to shift in favor of a pair of progressive Democrats running against a highly inflammatory convicted felon, yeah? Well, if you said the margins would shift 10 points to the right in that scenario, you'd be absolutely correct. When 8 different counties shifted 8 points or more to the right, and the furthest shifting county being the home of Boston itself, Suffolk County, moving 12 points to the right, things start to get a little bit worrying. Now, Massachusetts is by no means going to be competitive in the near future, but this is still extremely relevant due to the types of voters that Donald Trump won over in deep blue Massachusetts, and what it says about the future of American politics as we know it. Massachusetts Republicans were at one point permanently boxed out of any real long-term power, with the obvious exceptions of a string of awful Republican governors, including Bill Weld, Mitt Romney, and Charlie Baker. I bring this up because it wasn't just Trump who overperformed in Massachusetts, but the entire Republican ticket here. Elizabeth Warren only won by 19%, her worst performance since she first ran in 2012. On top of this, Trump came within 8% of flipping Massachusetts' 9th congressional district, a 10-point swing relative to his performance in 2020. Personally, I think that these are just little cracks in the hegemony that Massachusetts Democrats enjoy over the state, or have enjoyed over the state since the 1960s. And while I doubt that the state will be any more competitive than, say, a D+15 state, I think the GOP would be absolutely foolish not to run John Deaton, our nominee for Senate in Massachusetts, to be our candidate for the 9th district. Beyond this, however, given that the power over the state millionaires in Boston have, I strongly doubt that we'll be getting much further than this. Now, if there's another metro area that swung strongly to the right, it's Chicagoland. And if it weren't for the absolute monstrosity that is the Illinois congressional map, we would have picked up at least 2 and potentially as many as 5 seats, but that's whatever. What isn't whatever is the swinging Cook County, the home of Chicago, and the neighboring dense suburban Kane and Will counties. What's most important about these counties is because of just how large of a percentage of the state that they represent. And in fact, these counties single-handedly shifted Illinois' margin 7 points to the right, making it now a D+10 state. The reason why I bring up this specific number is that had Trump performed just a smidgen better, Illinois would have officially entered the list of battleground states. What likely caused this was a combination of the extreme incompetence of the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, young men in Chicagoland shifting heavily for Trump, and lower-income voters in general also shifting in Trump's favor. For context, Kamala Harris won Illinois by less than Trump won Iowa, Florida, or even Ohio. And with all of Trump's gains coming from upstate, it wouldn't surprise me if Illinois actually does become a battleground state in the not-too-distant future. Now up next is another place that's far easier to diagnose, and that's of course the Corn Belt. As we can see on the map, there's a massive band of counties that all shifted strongly to the right this time around, stretching from northeastern Missouri and northwestern Illinois all the way northwest through the driftless area in Iowa, and ending in the general region comprising the eastern North Dakota area and western Minnesota. Now let's activate our almonds and ask ourselves, what do all these counties have in common? Well, they're very rural, very white, and very agricultural. These are the types of people who in the past would have been progressive Democrats who would have enthusiastically voted for, say, Tom Harkin, Eugene McCarthy, Kent Conrad, Tom Daschle, or Russ Feingold. So why do they shift so hard for Trump instead of Kamala? Because the parties themselves have changed. White farmers who don't need college because they're too busy putting food on your table aren't going to take kindly to a woman who wants to import slaves from the third world to undercut their prices. This is primarily due to the immigration issue, but it was also exacerbated by Kamala having almost zero appeal to white Americans. While it's absolutely true that Trump's immigration views may have single-handedly carried him among these voters, it would be ignorant as well to not address the social issues. For instance, when the nearest police station is an hour away, you're going to have to use a gun to defend yourself, and the party that will protect your gun rights will almost certainly have a point of strength in rural America over the party that won't. If you make affirmative action a large pillar of your campaign like Kamala did, you won't get rural whites to turn out for you because affirmative action necessarily disadvantages them. It's issues like this combined with immigration that chipped away at whatever was left of the wholesome blue-collar Democrats in farm country, and why Trump overperformed his 2020 margin so strongly. Back in the year 2000, Florida gained infamy for the agonizingly slow process of counting votes that led to a disputed outcome that ended up at the Supreme Court. As we know, Bush was declared the victor and the rest is history, but that feels like ancient history today. Trump completely shattered the expectations of many pundits who thought that Florida would be within 10 points, but boy were they wrong. The end result was a victory of 13 points, the most lopsided margin for a presidential candidate in the Sunshine State since George H.W. Bush won it by 23 in his 40-state landslide victory over Michael Dukakis. Now, what makes this so interesting is that Trump not only overperformed in the cities, but he actually flipped some of them. Firing off a lightning round, Trump did 8.5 points better in Collier County, which is the home of Naples, 9 points better in Lee County, 9.5 points better in Orange County, home of Orlando, 10 points better in Hillsborough County, home of Tampa Bay, 12 points better in Palm Beach, 13 points better in Broward County, 15 points better in Osceola County, and a whopping 19 points better in Miami-Dade. This is an absolute game changer for the state of Florida, ladies and gentlemen. This is like Colorado in 2020, except obviously in favor of the Republicans. And we may likely never see a statewide Democrat victory in Florida in the next 20 years because of these Latino trends. The issue with discussing Latinos in Florida is that this is such a drastic shift in such a short amount of time that it's honestly quite difficult to really diagnose what caused this. So I'm going to take my shot right here. The primary cause of the Latino shift is that Latinos tend to be both working class and socially conservative. And this also happens to coincide with a nationwide shift of Catholic voters in favor of the GOP. This was like a 1-2 punch for Democrats in Florida, who keep shedding socially conservative ancestral Democrats and have fallen out of favor with the country's Catholic community. Another thing is that a lot of Latino voters in 2016, and less so in 2020, fear that they would be deported or their legal family members would be deported, and as a result they were afraid of voting for Trump. When the whole Trump hates Latinos cadre stopped being nearly as influential sometime earlier this year, Latinos began to open their minds to President Trump. And I think that a combination of immigration, social issues, the Catholic faith, and growing fondness of Donald Trump as a constituency at all are what ultimately caused Florida's turn from a toss-up state to a nice ruby red. Back in 2022, a new figure jumped onto the national scene. Running against an unpopular governor, without pushing away Donald Trump, and without pivoting to the left in a deep blue state, many of us initially thought that Lee Zeldin would have been a sacrificial lamb. A candidate we ran just to have someone to run for the gubernatorial race. But little did we know just how influential Zeldin really was in the long term. A city boy through and through, Zeldin reached margins of the Big Apple that many thought were impossible, and ultimately held incumbent Kathy Hochul to a humiliating 6% margin of victory. Now, while many of us chalked this up to a fluke, it turns out that we could not have been more wrong. The New York metro area is a large, diverse, and very fascinating part of the country that serves as our financial and cultural capital. So to see Donald Trump, of all people, be the best performing Republican since Reagan in this area is, quite frankly, surreal, to say the least. Before we dive any deeper, I want to explain the confusing nature of this map that I'm showing on screen. Every part of the map, with the exception of the darkest of blues, has shifted in Trump's favor. So those lighter blue areas actually also shifted in favor of Trump. What we can see is the majority of Queens shifted at least 7% in Trump's direction. Western Brooklyn shifted massively in Trump's favor. All of Staten Island, with the exception of one precinct, shifted towards Trump. And even the Bronx has a lot of red on it. And while the map is misleading, even Manhattan actually shifted a bit to Trump, but at a much lesser rate than the rest of the city. What does this show exactly? I honestly can't say. You don't just make gains like this with only one reason, so let me take a crack at it. The first is obviously immigration. Many New Yorkers have shifted to the right since migrants were shipped their way by Governors Abbott and DeSantis as a way of lessening the burden on the border states, since the federal government proved unserious in actually dealing with the issue. The second is crime. New York is a dangerous place, and the GOP's strong stances on self-defense law make it far more appealing for a lot of citizens who are concerned with the epidemic of armed robbery and carjacking. Finally, I think that the GOP's stance on broad income tax cuts for the middle class and working class Americans is a popular stance that resonates in the high-tax environment of the Big Apple. That said, it isn't just the city, but also the suburbs that have zoomed right. And firing off another lightning round, we can see that Westchester County moved 10 points to the right. Suffolk County, New York, as well as Union and Essex counties, New Jersey, each moved 11 points to the right. Bergen and Rockland counties each moved 13. Nassau and Middlesex, New Jersey, each moved 14. Hudson, New Jersey, moved 18 points to the right. And finally, Passaic County, New Jersey, moved a whopping 19 points to the right. It seems like everyone in the New York metro area, regardless of color or creed, is tired of high crime, mass migration, and the inability to defend themselves. And in terms of the raw number of voters, this may be Trump's single biggest gain in the whole country among any metro area we're about to cover. Nearing the bottom of our list is another highly Latino state the Democrats thought they had a shot in. This one, of course, being Texas. Just like Florida, we can see a similar trend with the big cities shifting strongly to the right. But unlike Florida, Texas is home to a very culturally rich community of Latinos who have lived in the state since before it joined the Union, aka the Tejanos. What's so important about the Tejano community is that they have historically played a strong role in Texas and were a reliable voting bloc for statewide Democrats. The key word there is were, because the heavily Latino Rio Grande area is home to some of the biggest countywide shifts in the entire country. If you thought that Trump doing 19 points better in Miami-Dade was impressive, Texas has 8 counties that shifted further in Trump's direction than that, with the biggest being Maverick County at 28 points of improvement. If that wasn't enough, Trump also gained 10% in Dallas County, 20% in El Paso, 8% in Harris County, home of Houston, 8.5 points in Bexar County, which is San Antonio, and 9.2% better in Fort Bend. Overall, this is one of the most dramatic gains of the Republican Party in Texas since the Bush era, and that was primarily because Bush was from the state, not because of policy or anything. This is, however, the death of Blexus, at least for now. Rounding off with the home of George Washington, Robert E. Lee, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, the great Commonwealth of Virginia has been nothing if not full of surprises, and 2024 is no exception. Virginia followed that up with a Republican sweep of her 3 statewide offices at the quick rebound of the floundering Virginia GOP. Following a strong 2022, and the GOP losing their state legislature by a literal hair in 2023, Virginia cemented herself as a key swing state that we all knew it was going to be. What happened in 2024 was a real surprise, however. While the final result was that the state was barely in the likely margin, and really, I think when all the votes are counted, it's going to be lean, we expected Trump's biggest shifts to be in the suburbs. When the votes came in, it wasn't the outer DC suburbs that caused Harris to underperform Biden. It was Nova that made Virginia such a close state in the end. Now, this is the most interesting result we could have gotten because Nova isn't exactly a poorly run place. It's actually quite nice. It's filled with center-left urbanites who tend to be strongly in the Democratic column. So here's my take. The Youngkin machine is responsible for this swing to the right. This is the only explanation that makes practical sense given that the critical race theory debacle happened 3 years ago, and Nova hasn't attracted many illegal migrants either. There haven't been any major demographic shifts in the area as well, so can't really work off of that. What we can see is a combination of left-wing positions on social issues, low support among rural blacks, a creating with Latinos, Catholics, and white ethnics, her support for gun control, a weak economy, an unpopular president, strong Republican political machines, her support for free trade, underwhelming economic proposals, the personal aesthetics of Kamala Harris, and a global anti-incumbent wave were really what caused Kamala Harris to be boxed out of the White House. Now that we know this, how could Kamala have won? Well, I honestly don't think it was really possible. Trump's a formidable candidate who drives out working-class turnout in a way that no other Republican can, at least not in recent history. Had I been in charge of the Harris campaign, I would have recommended that they pivot to the right on guns and support better background checks instead. I would have ran to Trump's right on illegal immigration, as pro-immigration politics is complete anathema to America, as evidenced by the election results. I would have also talked about fair trade. I would have talked about universal health care, and I would have completely disavowed transgenderism being taught to children. I'd then order Kamala and Tim to spend a few days working on being more personable and then schedule a constant slew of podcasts and interviews. I'd also try to attach Kamala to stronger down-ballot Democrats like Bob Casey, Tammy Baldwin, and Roy Cooper. I would have condemned the Cheneys and told them to pound sand. And finally, I would have put as much distance as possible between Kamala and Biden. So what do you guys think about this? Do you have anything yourself to say? If so, feel free to comment down below your thoughts and maybe share this video around. I've put in a lot of effort making this project, and I hope to make a career out of YouTube someday. Thank you very much for watching, and Cobson out.